Seth Miller,
and we had Yusuf Hassan.
I have been folding my tongue beneath itself, bleaching my language, clenching my jaw with shackled teeth, because the moment I open my mouth, uprising spring from my saliva, my dialogue is cruddy. Trample with the muddy boots of trade and migration, battling nations in my diaphragm, so the rhythm in my diction sounds like a war cry. And despite the white stuff down my windpipe, I talk black with nappy phonics, syllables that kink and twist, naughty expression that beads on my palate, soul glow in this spit shine flow, Jerry curl jogging, bongo drums in my diction. This slang is semantic resistance, off with the head of the king's English. Can't you smell the riot on my breath? Char in my esophagus, my laugh is arsenic. And ain't enough opiates in this elementary education to hook me on phonics or gentrify the djembe out of my pronunciation. Love the taste of this cornbread accent. Sugar cane slang my tongue is. Motherland, mama of civilization, birth of every nation. Scat, boom, back, hi-hat, jazz, sax. There is music in my melanin and I be talking hella black. With a neck roll to articulate my tone. Conversations get you high as my cheekbones, and lingo about lush as these hips done grown. Thick thighs and deep fried vernacular, hand motions and sound effects, hieroglyphics hidden in my messages. My breath is the building of the pyramids on repeat. I'm like a Negro spiritual sampled over a trap beat. There is a black anthem inside my belly, so I will always lift every voice and speak.
Good evening, everyone. Hey, Miss Mace.
Hey, what's up with you?
Welcome to day 4 of the Black Effect. You know, I had to rob and hijack the host seat because there's some powerful speakers on tonight. I'm so happy to be here. For those of y'all who don't know me, my name is Lulu Cameron. I am the founder of South Carolina for Restorative Justice. I am the training and legislation coordinator with the National Plus Coalition, and I do a whole lot of related to justice, but I love working with grassroots organizations. So the Black Effect is a event hosted by the National Plus Coalition and streamed through our sister company, Plus TV and Media Productions. This event is being led by 15 of the most powerful speakers we could find to discuss 15 topics that affect melanated people on a national note. And of course, I wouldn't be remiss if I didn't introduce my lovely co-hostess, Francetta Mays. She's a native of Oklahoma City, currently residing in Oklahoma City, and she is the owner of Nile Dorms, pronounced In Your Dreams, Broadcasting, Publications, and Events, LLC, talk show host for Flipping the Script, the current NAACP president, liaison for the Tulsa, Oklahoma chapter 6143, and she is also a pastor at the Going Hard for Christ Church in Tulsa. Miss Mays became very passionate regarding criminal justice reform in August of 2021 after hearing the story of Prentice Pond, a man serving a life sentence plus 25 years for a fistfight in his home. And since then, she has been relentless in her endeavors to change the narrative for everyone who works in the community and abroad. Ms. Mays now uses her voice as a platform to bring awareness and enlist the assistance of people, no matter the nationality or background. She dares to believe that each one can reach one and then affect the lives of many. So I just want y'all to say hey to Miss Mays in the comments, because she is in the building, and I'm so happy to be here.
Lulu, you know I love you.
you too, girl. Like a little women's history, get us started with some beautiful, powerful, amazing women who are doing great things. So I just had to take over tonight. So please for being bossy.
It is quite all right, Lulu. I am super excited. I mean, I'm still reeling from yesterday. Takia had me go get a hat. I had to go get a whole hat. She brought it. And then we had Seth Miller that was talking to us about these businesses. And I'm like, oh my God. If I had have had that in my life when I was younger, I'd be a millionaire by now. I just love the dialogue and the openness of everything that we have that's been coming out all week. And actually, tonight we have our first speaker, which is going to be her name is Leisha Mckinley-Beach. She is a thought leader. She's an advocate for Black health, an author, a trainer. She's an inspirational speaker and a facilitator. Mrs. McKinley-Beach serves as a subject matter expert in HIV prevention, racism in public health, and Black women's health. She has an extensive 30-year career in HIV, including creation of her own health consulting firm, serving in Florida and Georgia health departments, founding the first Black AIDS service organization in Northwest Florida, and serving in the nation's only organization that focused exclusive on Black people and HIV, known as the Black AIDS Institute. McKinley-Beach currently serves as a trainer and educator for PREP, a women facilitator for organizations and health departments committed to anti-racism work and for the development of Black leadership in public health. Leisha Mckinley-Beach is using her gift of storytelling to uplift Black stories in healthcare through her YouTube channel, 3HD, which stands for Health, Hope, and Healing for Your Destiny. In addition to her health work, Mrs. McKinley-Beach is committed to providing inspirational messages through her podcast, Thought for the Day, and serves as the COO for Platinum Level Production, music production company founded by her husband. This platform provides an opportunity for artists to create inspirational music. McKinley-Beach received her undergraduate bachelor's degree from the University of Florida and her master's degree in public health from the University of West Florida. Powerful women on tonight. I'm so excited. You guys, please welcome to our show on the Black Effect tonight, Miss Leisha. Go for it, girlfriend.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that welcome. I am so excited to be here on tonight. And I'm just been really excited all week listening to subject matter experts share things that are happening with our community, things to enhance our community. So kudos to all of these wonderful organizers and just amazing people that created the Black Effect. I'm Leisha Mckinley-Beach. Miss Mays made me seem like I was really VIP on this evening. But I'm really excited to be here to raise awareness for a health issue in our community that at one point was the center of attention. And as years have gone by and as medications have gotten better, we tend to put HIV in the background. But I'm going to spend a few minutes tonight talking about why it is so important that we bring it to the forefront again. We recently observed the 40-year, hear me, 40-year anniversary of HIV. June 5th, 1981 to June 5th, 2021. But I want to just take a moment to go back for a moment when we're talking about HIV and what happened on June 5th, 1981, that became a moment that created the barrier to HIV for what we're seeing 40 years later. There's this famous medical journal. It's called the MMWR, which stands for the Mortality and Morbidity Weekly Review. This article hit June 5th, 1981, and that's what we call our HIV anniversary. And it talked about this illness. And this illness that was in 5 white men. And when that news hit and that press conference hit, Black people were like, finally, something that don't impact us. We're sorry that other folk are going through this, but this ain't got nothing to do with us. What that MMWR didn't report was that patient 6 was a Black man. Patient 7 was also a Black man. So being in the trenches of what is about to impact the United States as well as the globe also impacted Black people. And what we learn from that moment is 40 years later, we have still been trying to raise awareness about HIV in our community. Now, in public health, we like to use this fancy term called syndemics of health. Just basically mean that it's more than one thing happening at a time, and these two things occurring, that they are impacting our ability, right, to end or to make progress with the other. Now, I'm hoping I'm not talking to just young people. Those of you who can take a stroll down memory lane and go back to the 80s will remember that HIV is not the only health issue we were dealing with. We were also dealing with crack cocaine. And when those two health components came together, they created a syndemic that caused devastation in our community, that there are still families that are still feeling the impact and the effects of it to this day. Now, let's fast forward to where we are in the epidemic now, 40 years later. There is some good news, and then there's not so good news. The good news is we are finally seeing some decreases in the HIV epidemic. Decreases among Black women, decreases among Black men. But when we look at those decreases, what they're not telling us is when you had such a huge disparity, a 10% or a 13% decrease still doesn't get us to the equity that's needed to end the HIV epidemic. Let me give you an example. So when we look at the female cases of HIV in the United States, Black women represent nearly 70% of all of the female cases. And so I want to be clear that folks understand that that's female cases. It's not all the HIV cases. It's just cases among women. Black women represent about 70% of those cases. So when you see a 10% decrease in new HIV diagnoses among Black women, that does give us reason to celebrate. but it still shows that there's a huge gap between the number of HIV cases among Black women and the number of HIV cases among white women, so that there's still so much work to be done. Now we're in this initiative that started under the Trump administration, that the Biden administration is continuing, and it's called Ending the HIV Epidemic. And with ending the epidemic, the goal is that by 2030, that's just 8 years, y'all, 8 years from now, that the United States will be able to say that the HIV epidemic is over. Do I believe that it can happen? Yes and no. Wait a minute, Leisha. Now that don't even sound right. Yes, you're going to have to make a decision. Okay, well, this is why I say yes and no. I do believe that for white populations, that HIV will be over for those communities in the next 8 years. But there are projections that say that in Black communities, especially urban Black communities, we are talking about being in this epidemic still until well into 2040. Can you imagine what it will be like that when white communities have declared victory over HIV, it means funding will dry up. It means awareness and attention will dry up. It means that many of these social and public health programs for HIV will dry up, and Black communities will be left to fend for ourselves to end this epidemic. Well, why do you think that there's going to be this huge disparity between when white communities end HIV and Black communities? I'm glad you asked, and I'm going to tell you. One of the biggest issues in healthcare, in public health, that's not just about HIV, it's about public health as a whole. And that is, we have not declared racism as a public health crisis. And it comes out from access to awareness, to service delivery, to health outcomes. And until this country owns that and begin to look at the impact of racism, we're going to continue to see these health disparities, not just in HIV, but clearly this has been one that we have seen from its very conception. I don't know if I'm almost out of time, but I do want to leave you with at least 3 points that say, what can I do? This was great information, but what can I do? Number one, it's so important for us as a community that we take the action that we ask other people to take. And that is, we need to know our own HIV status. We can't tell folks about the significance and importance of knowing being tested for HIV if we have not done it for ourselves. Number two, and this is also important, is to educate ourselves as well as educate others. We are now in one of the most amazing moments in HIV. And that is, we have now a medication to prevent HIV from occurring. This is huge. This is a really, really big deal. The fact that we have a medicine to prevent HIV from occurring. Well, let me give you an example of what this is. You heard in the bio talking about me as an educator for pre-exposure prophylaxis, which we call PrEP. And that pre means taking medicine to ensure that there isn't a transmission of HIV from occurring. And so one would take this medicine. Until this year, we only had this oral medication for folks to be able to take a daily pill, and taking that daily pill prevents transmission of HIV. Sounds like a great thing, right? It is. But when we look at the PrEP prescription data, what we see is that the folks who have benefited the most from PrEP are white men. That only 10% of the PrEP prescriptions in the United States have been given to Black individuals. And I don't have the time to get into all of those issues about why that is so significant, but I will say this, that provider bias in terms of will we use PrEP or not, will we adhere to the medication or not, definitely plays a role in that. What we also see that's playing a role is the fact that for women, many women don't even know that they can take PrEP. Why? Because the one commercial, y'all done seen it. You see it on all of the major network channels, BET, TNT, CBS, ABC, talks about a medication that's not approved for the term used is people assigned female at birth. What that mean? That means that it's not for someone like me. Well, if you're not educated about PrEP, you don't know that it exists. When you see that commercial, then you say, oh, well, that's not for women. It's not true. That particular medication for PrEP is not for women. So now we know our own HIV status. Number two, continue our HIV education so that we can share it with our community. And my third point is we got to learn to have compassion without judgment. HIV has always been a health issue. It is not a moral issue. It is not a religious issue. It is a health issue. Folk just started to act kind of funny because we got to talk about sex or injecting drug use. And so folks want to be able to label, well, that's a shame. Them folks went out there and they asked for it. But then when we look at children who might have been born with HIV, then we want to say, oh, well, they didn't have a say in that. HIV is HIV. And as a community, we have to learn that to end some of the stigma so that folks feel comfortable being able to go and seek medical care and treatment, that folks feel comfortable and supported in our community by talking about somebody who is living beyond their HIV status. They're going to need us to show compassion without any judgment. And so those three things as individuals help us move the needle in terms of ending the HIV epidemic. And 3B, you know, I'm like a Baptist preacher, y'all. You only supposed to have 3 points. I done gave you the 3. I'm gonna give you 3B. 3B is vote. And why voting is so significant when it comes to public health is the fact that the governors in your state, they normally appoint your whether you call them the health commissioner or the surgeon general, that highest health position within your state is normally appointed by the governor. And so if you don't have a governor who understands culturally the significance or the need for programs within our communities, and they hire like-minded people like them, it continues to create these models of health disparities like what we see in HIV. And so I do hope that I have shared new information. I do hope that I have encouraged or motivated folks to take what they have learned tonight and share that with your family, with your friends. Like, girl, did you know that they got a drug to prevent HIV? That's fact. That is very true. And until this year, now we actually have that same drug now in an injectable form. Well, now folks can take an injection once every other month, for those individuals who might do struggle with taking a pill every day. Now that we have this other option, and that's really exciting for me. So I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to turn it back over to our host for the evening. But I don't want to leave without saying thank you so much, because so many issues are within our community. And for HIV to be one of those 15 topics, I am truly honored and grateful to be a part of this conversation.
Oh, I've been just talking away on mute. Y'all ain't nothing to me. I've been picking on Maria for the past 3 days about being on mute every time. So I said, let me try to repeat myself. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that wisdom and that knowledge, because, especially in the Black community, we have a lot of folks just out here willy-nilly doing things, without covering them up, without thinking about the afterthought, without thinking about the impacts that it has on your life or lives of other people and our children even. And so I just, I can't wait until the question and answer. I've got my whole list of questions up here. I was like, wait, what did you say now? Giving us the medicine. And so I have a lot of questions for you, and I can't wait for you to come back on the air to the Q&A. And so I just thank you for all of that wisdom and knowledge. I think it's definitely a necessary conversation to have among the Black community. And that goes, don't like to get checkups too, because
Yes.
That's a whole issue in the Black community. So thank you so much. We'll see you again at the end for questions.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. That's serious. I've been teaching my child about HIV, prevention on things like that for quite some time, because some of y'all ain't right out here in the world, and I gotta make sure I protect her. So up next, we have one of Plus's favorites. We have William Guster Jr., better known as Gus. He is a native of Greenville, Mississippi, and an alumnus of Greenville Weston High School and Alcorn University, specializing in behavioral health and individuals with developmental disorders. Gus is employed by the Mississippi Department of Mental Health and resides in Jackson. He currently serves as the minister of the music of the Word Truth Gospel Center Global and National, Mississippi, and Fort Worth, Texas, under Bishop T.C. Macbeth. He is a member of the Upsilon Phi Upsilon Fraternity, Inc., and serves as the president of the Mississippi Grad Chapter Zeta Epsilon, and active member of the National Plus Coalition. Gus takes great inspiration and motivation from Galatians 6:9. Be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we are not faint. So I'd like to go ahead and bring Gus on tonight, and let's listen to him discuss with us mental health, I believe. Excuse me, let me just see what's going on.
Hello. Well, first, I would like to reintroduce myself. Yes, I am William Guster, and I definitely would have to correct that. That's Alcorn, not Alcorn. There'd be a lot of people upset with me if I didn't correct that. And I also want to apologize for halfway wearing my mask where I'm at. We still take the COVID restrictions very, very serious. So I'm going to keep my mask on, but I'm going to pull it down so you guys can hear me. Um, Roughly 37 million people identify themselves as Black or African American in the United States. From trailblazing pioneers like George Washington Carver and Dorothy Height to modern day heroes like Anita Hill and Neil deGrasse Tyson, the Black community has made enormous contributions to the ongoing fight for social, racial, and economic justice. Despite these efforts, true social justice among the Black community will remain incomplete until mental health disparities among this group are addressed. Mental health is an essential part of overall physical health and satisfaction. The Black community suffers from an increased rate of mental health concerns, including anxiety and depression. The increased incidence of psychological difficulties in the Black community is related to the lack of access to appropriate and culturally responsive mental health care, prejudice and racism inherent in the daily environment of Black individuals, and historical trauma enacted on the Black community by the medical field. Moreover, given that the Black community exists at the intersection of racism, classism, and health inequity, their mental health needs are often exacerbated and mostly unfulfilled. Issues related to economic insecurity and the associated experiences, such as violence and criminal injustice, further serve to compound the mental health disparities in the Black population. Now, if we could go back to the very, very first slide. All right, the next one. There. 13.4% of the U.S. population, or nearly 46 million people, identify themselves as Black or African American, and the other 2.7 identify as multiracial. Okay, now the first few slides, you guys, is going to be stats and things because we're talking about mental health, and a lot of these facts come from research. And at the end, I'll also cite the people that done this research. We have to give people credit for the research they done. So let's go to the next slide. According to the most recent census data available, 55% of all Black and African American people lived in the South, 18% lived in the Midwest, 17% live in the Northeast, and 10% live in the West. The Black immigrant population in the U.S. increased from 816,000 in 1980 to over 4.2 million by 2016. 39% were from Africa and nearly half were from the Caribbean. Overall, 24% of Black and African American people have a bachelor's degree or higher as of 2017. Next, please. And more than 1 in 5 Black and African American people in the U.S. lived in poverty as of 2018. Women are the heads of households in roughly 30% of Black and African American homes compared to 9% of white homes. Historical adversity, which includes slavery, sharecropping, and race-based exclusion from health, educational, social, and economic resources, translating to socioeconomic disparities experienced by Black and African American people today. Socioeconomic status, in turn, is linked to mental health. People who are impoverished, homeless, incarcerated, or have substance abuse problems are at higher risk for poor mental health. And before we go on to the next slide, I would also like to add that African Americans develop mental health conditions at a rate equal to anyone else. We also experience trauma as a result of living within a society of systemic racism. According to Mental Health America, Black people experience direct traumatic stressors, including being heavily policed or being the victims of physical, verbal attacks. Indirect stresses, including the stress that come from things like watching the video of the killing of George Floyd and the Trayvon Martin thing, and transmitted stresses from traumatic stress passed from generation to the next. So we do have stress and psychological problems that is passed genetically, and a lot of us we don't know about that. So, and statistics tell us that about 25% of African Americans seek healthcare compared to 40% of white. Despite progress made over the years, racism continues to have an impact on the mental health of Black and African American people. Negative stereotypes and attitudes of rejection have decreased, but continue to occur with measurable adverse consequences. Historical and contemporary instances of negative treatment have led to a mistrust of authorities, many of whom are not seen as having the best interests of Black and African Americans in mind. Right? Next. Black and African American people living below poverty are twice as likely to report serious psychological distress than those living over the poverty line, 2 times over the poverty line. Adult Blacks and African Americans are more likely to have feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and worthlessness than adult whites. Blacks and African Americans are less likely than white people to die from suicide at all ages. However, Black and African American teenagers are more likely to attempt suicide than white teenagers. 16% of Black and African American people reported having a mental illness, and 22.4% of those reported a serious mental illness over the past year. Serious mental illness rose among all ages of Black and African American people between 2008 and 2018. Despite rates being less than the overall U.S. population, major depressive episodes increased from 9% to 10.3% in Black and African American youth ages 12 to 17, 6.1% to 9.4% in young adults 18 to 25, and 5.7% to 6.3% in the 26 to 49 age range between 2015 and 2018. Suicidal thoughts, plans, and attempts are also rising among Black and African American young adults. While still lower than the overall U.S. population aged 18 to 25, 9.5% of Black and African Americans 18 to 25-year-olds had serious thoughts of suicide in 2018, compared to a 6% in 2008 and 3.6% made a plan in 2018, compared to 2.1% in 2008 and 2.4% made an attempt in 2018, compared to 1.5% in 2008. Binge drinking, smoking, cigarettes, and marijuana, illicit drugs, and use of prescription pain reliever misuse are more frequent among Black and African American adults with mental illness. Black and African Americans hold beliefs related to stigma, psychological openness, and help seeking, which in turn affects their coping behaviors. Participants in these studies are not very open acknowledging psychological problems, but they are somewhat open to seek mental health services. And this is because of stigmas that we'll speak of later on. But the root of mental health stigma among Black people can be traced back to slavery. At the time, it was commonly thought that slaves were not sophisticated enough to develop depression, anxiety, or other mental health disorders. From those historic misconceptions, we learned to ignore mental illness or call it other terms like stress and being tired. Such nuanced descriptions for depression and other mental illness that the Black community adopted and passed on from generation to generation led to the underestimating of the effects and impact of mental health conditions. Also, it strengthened beliefs that a psychiatric disorder is a personal weakness. I think the slideshow may be getting away from me a little bit. I'm at 30% of participants, or 30% of African Americans reported having a mental illness or receiving treatment for mental illness. Black and just stay right there. Just stay right there. Black and African American men are particularly concerned about stigma, cohort effects, exposure to mental illness, and increased knowledge of mental illness are factors that could potentially change beliefs about symptoms of mental illness. Black and African Americans appear apprehensive about seeking professional help for mental issues, which is consistent with previous research. However, participants were willing to seek out some form of help. So, like, we still are our people are still reluctant about telling what's going on, but we are starting to seek help. Okay, let's move on to the treatment issues. Okay. Black and African American people are more often diagnosed with schizophrenia and less often diagnosed with mood disorders compared to white people with the same symptoms. Additionally, they are offered medication or therapy at lower rates than the general population. Black and African American people are overrepresented in our jails and prisons. Black and African American people make up 13% of the general U.S. population, but nearly 40% of the prison population. In 2016, the imprisonment rate for Black and African American men was more than 6 times greater than that for white men. And the imprisonment rate for Black and African American women was almost double that for white women. Black and African American people with mental health conditions, specifically those involved in psychosis, are more likely to be in jail or prison than people of other races. Stigma and judgment prevent Black and African American people from seeking treatment for their mental illnesses. Research indicates that Blacks and African Americans believe that mild depression or anxiety would be considered crazy in their social circles. Furthermore, many believe that discussions about mental illness would not be appropriate even among family. All right, let's move on to accessing insurance. While the implementation of the Affordable Care Act has helped close the gap of uninsured individuals, 11.5% of Black and African Americans versus 7.5% of white Americans were still uninsured in 2018. In 2018, 58.2% of Black and African American young adults 18 through 25 and 50.1% of adults 26 through 49 with serious mental illnesses did not receive treatment. Nearly 90% of Black and African American people over the age of 12 with a substance abuse disorder did not receive treatment. In 2016, 12.3% of Black and African American adults who had a doctor's office or clinic visit over the past year had difficulty getting needed care, test, or treatment compared to 6.8% of white adults. Now, the 10 biggest barriers to Black mental health today. Now, let's get after that. The first one being high cost of mental health care. Despite the Affordable Care Act, around 12% of African Americans are uninsured, as Dr. Latoya Gaines notes in her research. Even those with health insurance often don't have mental health services covered or have expensive copays or deductibles. Some therapists choose not to take insurance, and many people do not understand how to use out-of-network benefits to cover the cost of sessions. She tells us paying out of pocket often isn't an option for a lot of Black people, and that lack of financial means stops them from being able to consistently engage in mental health care. The second one is family shame, familiar shame around mental health. A lot of us are ashamed and embarrassed to tell our families or even give an inkling that we may have a problem, especially we come from, and we've seen in the stats that a lot of Black people live in the South, and a lot of us are definitely religiously affiliated. So we find ourselves in positions where we're ashamed or embarrassed to even give our family and our friends evidence of symptoms, So that has become a problem and a barrier. 3, cultural stigma of mental illness. The familiar shame often stems from a broader cultural stigma surrounding mental health in the Black community. Going to therapy is viewed as a sign of weakness and something to be ashamed of. A lot of Black people don't think of therapy as a realistic or viable option for help, and mental health isn't seen as something to focus on, improve, or get professional help for. 4, lack of diversity in healthcare. Often Black people refer to talk to someone who looks like them and would better understand their experience. But unfortunately, in 2014, only around 2% of American Psychological Association members and associates identified as Black. This not only makes it harder to find a therapist, but that our caseloads fill up pretty quickly. The lack of representation can make it hard for those seeking a counselor to find the help they need when they need it. Recruitment and retention of Black therapists in training programs is key. 5, poor competency among non-Black clinicians. We have, now when I say poor competency among non-Black clinicians, I'm not saying that non-Black clinicians are not competent. But the thing is, a lot of things with our psychological health is definitely culturally based or genetically based. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of our culturally based issues haven't been definitely have not been recorded and written down, and they definitely haven't been studied by a lot of non-Black clinicians. So a lot of times when the therapist or the psychologist is assessing you, a lot of your background information they really don't understand. One, because they're not there in that environment with you, and two, is not taught in school. So 6, the 6th barrier, whiteness as a foundation to mental health care. Dr. Dogan explained that most of the psychological training that therapists receive is based on the experiences of white people, white norms, white values, and white beliefs, which can influence the competency of non-Black therapists. The DSM-5 generally does not account for cultural factors that influence I can't really pronounce the word right, but symptoms, the signs of symptoms, and diagnoses that speak to cultural issues such as racial discrimination and acculturation. Counseling, psychology, and social work training programs hardly ever include the voices of Black mental health theorists, researchers, and practitioners. Number 7, distrust of the medical industry. Many Black people have grown suspicious of the broader healthcare system due to a history of being mistreated and misdiagnosed that extends back to slavery. From eugenics, the bell curve, historically, the psychology community has bred mistrust in Black communities through unethical treatment, exploitative experimentation, and general deficit-based and culturally incompetent treatment. The 8th barrier, difficulty navigating the process. A lot of people don't know where to begin looking for a therapist who will fit their needs. In addition, most do not know what questions to ask a potential therapist when meeting for the first time to ensure they are the right fit. The 9th barrier is emotional hesitation. Black people are often taught to keep their feelings to ourselves. And so even after finding a therapist, the process of opening up can be particularly different. Talking about emotions is something that many of us are not directly taught how to do. So the idea of learning how to and sharing the process with a stranger can be daunting. And the 10th biggest barrier is negative past experience. It is often common that Black people have seen a counselor in the past, voluntary or involuntary, and the experience was not great. This could be due to the therapist's lack of cultural awareness and the competence of or other factors. Those negative experiences can dissuade Black people from finding a new counselor or continuing the healing process. The takeaway of all these issues make it more difficult to find and get help. At the same time, systemic racism takes a big toll on Black mental health and is fueling the crisis of depression and suicide. Now, I had to do a little works cited page because I used a lot of information from other psychologists and doctors and scientists. So in the Q&A, some of your questions, you probably would be able to refer back to this because that's where I got most of my facts from to bag up the things that I had to say. And I am humbled to be here tonight, and I look forward to the Q&A session. And that's all I have for right now.
Wow, that's a lot of outstanding information. Thank you for being so determined and diligent to ensure that we had all the facts. And thank you for the time that you really put into that. Mental illness is something it's a very important platform. A lot of our root system damage comes from post-traumatic stress disorder and different things that we suffered as children. And since we never go through the process of dealing with that trauma or the personalities that develop from that trauma occurring, because children, quite frankly, can't articulate what's going on with them. And they don't even know that they've been traumatized until you grow up to be a broken adult. So thank you for sharing tonight. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A session as well.
Thanks for having me.
Next, yes, sir. Next, we have coming up our next speaker, who is Andrea Johnson Hatton. Andrea is a public speaker, and her bio and her story really touched me. Andrea is experienced in community advocacy and engaging people in a relational way. Originally from Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, Andrea moved to Lancaster County in 2013. With extensive experience in recovery support and human services, I believe she said her name was Andrea. So forgive me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I know both names and people, so forgive me. Andrea considers herself to be a helper and a voice for the voiceless. Andrea also enjoys fulfilling work that is guided by equity, inclusion, and second chances. Her education and expertise: Andrea is employed as a substance abuse counselor. She has been certified by the Pennsylvania Certification Board as a recovery specialist since 2017 and was recently named a subject matter expert for their content revision process of the CRS credential. Andrea is a graduate student currently studying social work at Widener University. She is also an intern for two Penn Medicine community projects, providing substance abuse education and prevention, as well as resource coordination for families affected by substance use disorders. More about Andrea. When not working or studying, she enjoys cooking and spending time in nature. She is a mother of three and a woman in long term recovery. I am looking so forward to hearing this presentation by you. You guys, welcome Andrea to our show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really, really blessed to be here. As I was speaking with the other presenters and subject matter experts of this evening. Um, this is an experience. Like this whole, the past few days being here is just amazing to be part of the conversation, to talk about the things that are important and are affecting our people in our community. Um, I'm going to do my best to keep up with my slides here, because I don't want to I don't want any of this information to kind of go over anyone's head. I definitely don't want any of the important information to be missed. So if we can move off of this title slide to the very next one, whoa, just whoa. Everything that we've heard over the past couple of days, I just want to start, and I do try to start when I speak, by just giving a moment. I know that I don't have a lot of time tonight, so if we could take maybe just 30 seconds to a minute of just intentionality and breathing, to take a moment to reflect on everything that you've heard before me tonight. If you're returning, this is day 4. If you just to pause and reflect and breathe and give space to your thoughts and your feelings. I think that that's very important. So I'm going to start my little 30-second timer right now so that I can breathe and kind of come back to a place to be here present with y'all tonight. Okay. All right. This slide here is really just a picture. And I really, it's interesting because as we heard throughout tonight, like there's a couple epidemics that are going on all at once, right? We're in the middle of the pandemic, and there's other epidemics that are affecting America, but really affecting the Black community as well. And going back, I kept coming to this place, like we have to really go back to where it starts in order to understand where we're at now. So we can't talk about the effects of something without starting where it's at. And with this slide, this was taken in Washington, D.C. in 1993. And I just want to just pause and reflect on that for a second. Like the crack epidemic, the crack era, it really did affect every facet of the Black community, the Black family, from top to bottom. Yes, this was 1993. So we're going to go to the next slide. Thank you. And we can actually, this is the background. So we can go to this one here. To talk about the crack epidemic, we actually really need to define the term epidemic. Those of you watching tonight, you may have heard the word before. You might even have a good definition of it, but I thought it was really important to start there. So an epidemic is an occurrence of a disease that is temporarily high, of a high prevalence. That's kind of the general definition. If we can go on to the next slide. The relevant definition that I'm going to be focusing on tonight comes from the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and they break it down in, well, I'm breaking it down between the relevant definition and the working definition that we'll have here tonight. As a noun, it's the outbreak of a disease that spreads quickly and affects many individuals at the same time. It can also be defined as an outbreak or production of, outbreak or product, it should say product, of sudden rapid growth, spread, and development. And then, yes, we have really our working definition. And even as I read this and put this into the slide, I just felt it. Like, I know that this is the heart of what we're going to be getting at here tonight with my time. In its adjective form, an epidemic is affecting a disproportionately large number of individuals within a population, community, or region at the same time. It is excessively prevalent and contagious. And then it's also characterized by widespread growth. I should have mentioned here, really, I want to get at the relationship between race, poverty, crack, drug use in all of its behaviors, all of its manifestations. That's what we'll be talking about. I definitely heard it echoed throughout the other two presenters tonight, the other subject matter experts. There is a disproportionality that affects our community specifically. But then there's an intersectionality in how all of these other things are kind of interwoven and intermingled to kind of create this powder keg of a situation that we found ourselves in the early 80s, and we're still actually dealing with now, almost 40 years later. So some of those things are, I apologize. Here, got ahead of myself. I apologize. So with the foreign relations, at the start of the crack epidemic, there were so much different, political things that were going on with South America and Central America, the Contras, the cartels, and different political factions. And you can see this list here. A lot of these things, even as I read over this list, it really, they're covered under the umbrella of racism. The poverty law, the child welfare system, the educational system, even, mental health and psychology, those things are very hugely impacted by racism and anti-Black racism in the United States. So these are just some of the things that were brewing at the time A lot of fear mongering. I talked already about the disproportionality, the way that this epidemic affected Black people more so than any other cultural or ethnic grouping in the United States. If we can go to the next slide, please. It eroded the just the social constructs of our community. Our families were broken down. And these breakdowns came from a number of places. There were policies that were put into place. Actually, in the 70s, Nixon declared the war on drugs. It was reprioritized in the 80s through Reagan's administration. There was also manufacturing industries that left the cities, the large cities, in that time frame in the early 80s. That's also when we start to see a decline in the technical trades and things being offered in high schools, where people could leave high school and have a trade and be ready to start working. A lot of those things we started to see those decline in the early 80s. Leaving the major industries, leaving the cities created a huge gap in the workforce, creating unemployment. And then we also saw changes in crime statutes, specifically federal drug crime statutes, that created an increase in crimes in 1981 all the way up to 1986, especially those federal drug offenses, which I'll talk about in some future slides. We also saw an increase in robbery and aggravated assault. And those are the things that, those are the talking points. That's where the fear mongering came in, to, as headlines to sell newspapers on the evening news. It was very much portrayed as a thing, a bad thing that was happening in bad sections of the town with Black people who, were doing all of these scary things, which led to what I will talk about on the next slide, please. This reprioritization of the war on drugs. Yep, thank you, right there. The Reagan administration wanted to give off of its stance of being tough on crime. There were harsher penalties. As a matter of fact, most of the new crime laws that were pertaining to crack cocaine or cocaine in general were 100 to 1, which you'll see on another slide when I get into the numbers. There was definitely we were starting to see the disparities between a powder cocaine charge and a rock cocaine charge. And again, that difference was in demographics. If you remember the movie Scarface, powder cocaine was, glamorous. It was linked to, rich people and high society and fancy nightlife and fast cars and this almost romanticizing of the drug. But the images that we were seeing at the same time of crack cocaine were very different. They weren't bright, they weren't happy, they were dark. As you can see in some of those other images that I had throughout my slides, I did not get to call attention to the time frame or where those were coming from. But some of those other images in previous slides were from Harlem in 1986, Connecticut in 1994, and so on and so forth. And I don't want to spend a lot of time in the past, but like I said, we can't really know where we're going if we don't know where we came from as well. Yeah, if you can go back just one more slide, I apologize. We should be on the one here that says prevention and punishment. Awesome, there we go. These two things here, prevention and punishment, were pretty much what we were doing in response to the crack epidemic. And prevention, I would say, failed miserably. It is not to the point where we are now, where we know prevention to be a science, that there's actually methodology to it and evidence-based practices. And the second half of what I'll talk about here today will be a little bit more on that, but to also kind of set up the stage to when we get to the substance use portion of my talk here today. I wanted to call attention to what failed in the past and what we did in the past. Some of you may be old enough to remember the commercials and all the different things, or being there when Nancy Reagan gave her speeches and started her Just Say No campaign. So First Lady Reagan's public campaign, it was aimed at discouraging drug experimentation in children by simply saying no. Whenever you were presented with the instance to try a drug, or you came across people trying drugs, you were just supposed to say no, and that was supposed to be it. This actually got a lot of airtime during the mid to late 80s. There were a lot of celebrities that signed on to also kind of echo and help promote the campaign. On the punishment side of things, Ronald Reagan signed into law the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which also came with rescheduling some of these offenses to be federal offenses, and then also instituting mandatory minimum sentencing for those related drug charges. And this was a disproportionate practice. That's going to be the buzzword for tonight: disproportionate practice of handing out harsh sentences for people convicted of certain drug felonies. And by people, we mean Black people. They were disproportionately and negatively impacted by these practices. Next slide, please. All right, so here's just another image of Nancy Reagan's campaign. Even if you kind of take a look at any of these shots, the photos that we have from that time, you see her kind of surrounded by Black children, or in some pictures I've seen like interracial children, but really just reinforcing this concept. Bear with me one second. This is her in front of the White House in 1986. And there were some public surveys that were done during the Reagan years of his presidency. Particularly some numbers I want to call to your attention. Like they were asked about what they thought the number one fear was, or what should be the focus of things in the country, what the American people were most concerned about. In 1985, only 2% of the respondents to this survey listed a drug problem or youth drug experimentation as their number one fear. After her campaign launched, her campaign, meaning the Just Say No campaign, launched, that number increased to 64%. In 1989, and that again, I believe that's because of the fear mongering and the lack of evidence-based practices that were put into those types of prevention programs and prevention campaigns at that time. Next slide, please. With the war on drugs, any war we know will always have casualties. For our community, what it was increased deaths, increased addiction, which we'll talk about more as well, mass incarceration, and neglected children. I believe we've probably all heard the term crack babies. I definitely did not want to print that anywhere on my slides. It makes me cringe to say it. However, it was a phenomena that completely flooded the child welfare system. There was no medical research, virtually no medical research on how to treat some of the symptoms and the symptomology that children were having, being born exposed, prenatally exposed to cocaine, and specifically crack cocaine. Again, we saw disproportionate numbers of Black and brown children being placed into foster care and flooding through the child welfare system. Next slide, please. Just a timeline. The Anti-Drug Abuse Act was introduced in 1986, and that's the one that established those mandatory minimum sentences for certain drug offenses. And it also allotted $1.7 billion to the cause of, preventing drugs, anti-drug use. A lot of that money funneled into failed programs like DARE, which is the drug and alcohol resistance education program. If you are of a certain age, you might have even went through that program in school. I know that I went through the program in school. So yes. And also the failed Just Say No campaign. In 1989, statistics showed that 1 in 4 Black men between the ages of 20 to 29 were incarcerated or on parole due to the enactment of the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. And then by 1995, that those statistics had increased to 1 in 3 Black males aged 20 to 29 were incarcerated or on parole. Next slide, please. So also in those numbers, we see that disproportionality again at play. Another term for that are the disparities that we see. I just selected 2. There are many, but for illustration purposes only, you started to see the differences with that Anti-Drug Abuse Act between how we were convicting and treating what happened with powder cocaine users, with powder cocaine suppliers, versus people who were using crack or rock cocaine, as it was called back then. So economically, a lot of this, a lot of the powder cocaine was coming in through cartels. They had political resources. They had political alliances. They obviously had the money to continue to get the supply into the United States. Economically, for crack cocaine, it was mostly Black and brown communities, people who were selling drugs in order to, increase their economic outlook. From a criminal aspect, and this is where that 100 to 1 harsher penalty statistic comes back into play. If you were caught with 5 grams of crack cocaine, you were going to be sentenced as a mandatory minimum 5 years federal jail time. You would have to be caught with 500 grams of powder cocaine in order to receive the same amount of federal jail time. So that is, like I said, for illustration purposes, just to let you know the differences there. Among other things. We're going to thank you for advancing to the next slide. I say enough, you might be able to distinguish a pattern. It's probably time for the next slide, but thank you so much for staying right here. We're going to get into the numbers. And this is not even an accurate number at this point. The 2 million people incarcerated for nonviolent drug offenses, that was as of 2013, and that's the total number of people that's not distinguishing between race. That is the total number of people. Next slide, please. And we obviously have stereotypes. We have stigma. Those are things that we're going to get into as well in the following slides. 17 million white people self-reported, so that's them telling us that they have used an illicit substance in the last 30 days, compared to 4 million Black people reporting the same thing. However, we are still painted in all aspects of media as having a greater propensity, a greater inclination to use drugs. And I really have to ask, why is that? Why is it when the numbers and the research shows that we are not using as much substances? And then the very short answer is it's systemic racism. The long answer, I don't know if I have enough time left to get into that. Next slide, please. Again, Black Americans make up only 12.5% of illicit substance users, yet we constitute 33% of incarcerations and drug-related incarcerations. And that comes from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. That was 2018 numbers. They do this survey, I believe, every year through the SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is a government organization. Next slide, please. 15.2% of Black Americans that need treatment actually go on to receive treatment for their substance use, compared to 9.6% of the rest of the population. And there's this is really where we start to get into substance use disorder. Thank you, right there. Substance use disorder, which is a slightly newer term. It's not brand new, but we used to use a lot of language that was really dehumanizing, that was really stigmatizing, and just not really reflective of what was going on. So substance use disorder is actually, it's listed in the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. So what that means is it is a real disease. It is a brain disease. Substance use disorder kind of comprised of a lot of different things. It affects people biologically, psychologically, socially, and then also spiritually. Next slide, please. All right, so you might hear the terms addiction and substance use, or substance abuse, or substance use disorder used interchangeably, but their addiction is actually just the most severe form of substance use disorder. So because again, it's listed in the DSM as a psychological disorder, it has categories of severity. But substance use disorder, or SUD, substance use disorders are the recurrent, and that means chronic or relapsing, use of alcohol and other substances that impair people in the areas of health, school, work, and home, despite harmful consequences. So even though people might know that I could go to jail, or I might lose my job, or they might take my kids, they're using despite those harmful consequences. And it is in fact a brain disorder caused by repeated misuse of substances. Addiction is chronic, progressive, and fatal, but it is treatable. Next slide, please. All right. So here's one of my recommendations. There'll be a few more, but the messaging in our community, I definitely heard Brother Gus before me talking about this as well. So in our community, culturally, it is hard for us to talk about what is going on with us. It is hard for us to reach out for help for many reasons. But this is the messaging that I think is important for our communities. Like, prevention is important. Preventing substance use improves outcomes, health outcomes across the board. Substance use disorder is absolutely a public health crisis, not just in our community, but nationwide. So prevention comes in a few different ways. And what I mean by that is preventing the use of substances, preventing the likelihood that someone will use substances, and also prevention measures would also include deterring those substances from even coming in proximity with our communities. There is universal prevention, which affects everyone. And then there's also targeted prevention. So if there's someone who, for example, children of people who use substances, I think I'm getting the notification that I'm running out of time here. So there's just a few more things that I want to really nail down. So prevention is important. Treatment works. Therapeutic interventions are sometimes necessary. Sometimes we need to get help. And people recover. Recovery is possible and achievable. It is the expectation, not the exception. A working definition of recovery is the process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. That's also from SAMHSA. But what does that mean for Black people? If you can go ahead to the next slide, I swear I'm gonna wrap this up, guys. We have some barriers to treatment. We also have barriers to our recovery. However, these are the things that, you know, medically, family wise, these are the issues that are affecting us and also are kind of stemming from the systemic racism that we have. If you are a member of the LGBTQ community, there's additional stigma. It's harder to find treatment if you were to go inpatient, especially a lot of our trans community are having a hard time finding the right type of inpatient treatment for their gender expression and for their sexual identity. Next slide, please. All right, so my recommendations here. Is for recovering people to get connected to peer support, which could be other people who are also in recovery or could be certified. We need to address the trauma both individually and collectively in our community. Our community involvement is actually really high. People don't like to talk about how involved the Black community is, but that's because they're not part of the Black community. We talk about these things all the time amongst ourselves. You're here watching it tonight. You're part of it. You're part of that conversation. Family involvement to improve health outcomes. So next slide, and this is the last one. Thank you so much, guys, for hanging in here with me. What's next? We need to start where we're at. Activism geared to dismantling systemic racism, supporting, suggesting, demanding reform in policies, in healthcare practices, participating in collective healing, whether that be events such as this, putting on those events, listening to someone, getting someone help, and individual healing. And that's really, we can change our culture through prevention, because it's up to us to change our culture and our outcomes, starting where we're at. So that's it. My last slide is not going to come up, but I just wish healing to you. If you're in a family that's been affected by substance use disorder, if you know someone who's still struggling, like that is my prayer. That is my hope for you. It is possible. If you heard my my intro, I am a woman who is in long-term recovery. I've been impacted by these systems. I'm going through actually a pardon now to have my criminal record cleared. So I don't talk about it. I'm about it. And I wish the same for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing all of
Wow.
wealth of knowledge and information. I can't believe really, just listening to everyone speak tonight, basically, it really let me know the depths of how systemic racism truly affects us all. It continues to be a repetitious cycle that we just can't overcome. Because why? Because it's hard to overcome something that people haven't truly even admitted is real or haven't even truly addressed. And it's just kind of like an argument with your brother or your sister. You can't move past it until they at least acknowledge the level of pain that they have caused you, and that they are sorry. And so, you guys have been definitely speaking to, matters of my own personal heart, just as it relates to the way I move and the way that I think, and the way that I've been going about to be particular and precise in my own personal healing. So thank you all for really sharing a wealth of knowledge with us tonight. Questions that I received, and so we'll do a couple just for the sake of time, and we will go ahead and conclude for tonight. But it has been an honor to just be around you all and hear the way that you dissect the topics that you're passionate about, and that's really important. So I know, and I'll just start from the beginning. because I have a list and I got some other questions sent to me, so I'll ask those. But I definitely, for Leisha, I think that among there being those medicines out there that are available for everyone to utilize, but they're predominantly only given to the white communities. I think that really speaks volumes, because we are known to just not be taken as seriously as it relates to our medical health that we have. And so, that's really helpful. So do you know like what the numbers are of Black and brown people who actually even get tested for HIV? Because I think that that's something that most people wouldn't even consider. I think a lot of times, sometimes it's because we don't seek the treatments either.
Yes, no, that's a very great question. And so just briefly, when we look at HIV testing, and this is the lowest level, but this is also the level where Black communities play such a major role. And when I say Black communities, I mean where we can get access to get tested in our own churches, where we get access to get tested at health fairs at our neighborhood centers, where we're getting access to get tested from our own community-based organizations. Our testing numbers are relatively high, higher than any other racial and ethnic group. But from testing to diagnoses, where there are now fewer clinics that are Black led, there are fewer physicians that look like us. From testing to staying in care falls way off. And so now, where we were ranked number one in terms of learning our HIV diagnosis, we're ranked last in terms of getting access to care and staying in care.
I mean, like, why do you think that is? And I know that that kind of falls in line with mental health and substance abuse. Those things are going to fall like one in the same, if that makes sense. Like, what do you think the real life thing is? I mean, we can talk about familial shame and all those things, but I know for a fact I basically have to go into the doctor and tell them what I'm going to need and what, if I want to have some tests done or things like that, I let them know. They don't let me know. You know what I mean? Because it's more like a pat on the back. Oh, you're well. You just may be something because you're fat. I don't know. You got a little bump right there. I'm not real sure. It's never something that they want to check into directly until I make a big deal of it and say, no, I would like to have this and that done. And so what are some of the real components? Money, right? Because I see Black people here with things and Jordans and rims and kind of things. Now I know that there are people who just can't afford, but I also know that we prioritize things sometimes in a way that's not conducive to our own health. So what are the other obstacles that you think we face in receiving these services? Either one of, from all of y'all. Like if you could just say one thing, like what would you say is
I would say, the one thing, and all three of us mentioned it tonight, whether you called it systemic racism, you called it structural racism, it's racism. And so when two people walk into a doctor's office and a doctor gives a list of an entire panel of screenings and testing that they're going to do for one person that don't look like us, and for us, they treat whatever symptom that we presented when we walked in. Don't do a comprehensive screening. And I know this to be true for myself, that when I've had to ask for an HIV test from my doctor, he took my chart and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were married." So as if my marital status was going to make me exempt from getting HIV just because I'm married. You don't know. Maybe I'm the one that's stepping out. But you made these assumptions about me because you looked at what was presented to you and decided I don't need this.
Yeah, most definitely. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
Well, Lulu, I don't know. Can you hear me? All right. You spoke just a second ago also about priorities. And I think just culturally, for so long, we've been told without being told that, healthcare status matter, that we're not going to be, treated the same when we walk in, as Miss Leisha was saying. I think that there is less of a priority, um, throughout the community on our mental health. Internally from us, we have not been taught as much as our parts that is important. Proper screenings are important. Your nutrition is important. Those kinds of things, or those are not messages that we handed down. I don't, in general. So when it comes to things like this, yes, absolutely, always standing in the way. But then there's also those little things that are handed down through our family. I only went to the doctor because mama got the sugar, or this, that. Why is it that we have higher rates of diabetes, higher rates of high blood cholesterol, those things? And I think also prevention comes into that. Well, education and prevention in our communities. We don't know what we do.
You're totally right about that. Ms. Mays, did you have anything, or you want me to just go through?
Well, I had so much that I'm just sitting here trying to narrow it down. It's been a lot. I wanted to speak regarding the differences between the crack versus powder penalties. That really just blew my mind. I wasn't aware of that. So thank you for sharing that. What you were talking about regarding the collective healing. I'm in ministry, and being in ministry, you deal with a lot of people, as I was stating before, that dealt with childhood trauma. Well, then the collateral damage that comes from that is that you're looking for substance to numb the pain and the reality, and you just grow up with this behavior and a form of the addiction. And then typically people trade addiction so much, and it just becomes chaotic. So identifying, as you did, that there is recovery. I too am, years, I don't even know, 30, 40 years recovery. Now, I give God the glory. But I was back in that crack epidemic, you know what I mean? And you get caught up in this cycle, going through a lot of pain and a lot of things that I went through, just coming through childhood pain. So, as like you said, I'm actually living the tools right now that I had to acquire on that journey. So I'm grateful, and that's why I give God the glory. And I'm so grateful for each one of you and the presentations that you all had tonight regarding the mental health, AIDS that touched my heart. I had an actual cousin that passed away with AIDS. So the fact that I had to watch her die, that was very hard for me. So thank you for bringing clarity to our community. Regarding the mental health, getting help, you guys have to understand that the reason, there's a story, I'm going to say this and then I'll stop. But there's a story about a woman that would cut the end off the ham, and her husband asked her why, and it's like, I don't know, my mother used to do it. And so, he called her mom, and it's like, mother, why did you cut the end off the ham? I don't know, my mother used to do it. So they called the grandmother. She's like, well, baby, the pan was too small. So they've been cutting this ham all this time off because grandma did it. So we got to break the cycle of tradition, religion, all of this stuff that we've been programmed, and start acquiring the tools that we need right where we are in our moment, because we're just as unique as our thumbprint. And I love you guys. Thank you so much for sharing and being a part of tonight's show. Lulu, take us home.
Thank you. And I think you're so right in that. I think that, I can identify with a little bit of what everyone has discussed tonight, whether it not necessarily impacted me directly, or if it impacted someone to me, or, someone who I had a relationship with, or what have you, right? You see things and you experience things, and you have trauma behind those things that you experience. It's kind of hard for you to move past them. Myself, I suffer with, your anxiety from time to time. And so the mental health component and how we address things within our communities, that relates, I've had to take a different approach for myself and, in teaching my children, just that ensure that we as a community and a culture of Black people, we have got to get away from it's because I said so, right? Well, why are we doing this? Because I said so. And in Ms. May's response, you can say nobody had ever said why they were cutting the 10 off of that ham, right? But it is a prime example that our children are watching what we do and not what we say. And so we have to be very purposeful in what we do, and that it doesn't matter what we say, even though if we start to say stuff that sounds a little bit better and it moves a little bit better, it will be all the better for our communities as a whole, because you're looking at a reprogramming of generations of anguish and trauma that stem from racism and lead into other facets of our lives. And so I don't know if any of you have anything you want to close out with. If you want to add, Gus, I know we didn't give you really an opportunity to give us any feedback. If you want to say anything about health and how that impacts us, please feel free before we wrap up. I can't hear you, Gus. No. And you're not on mute, so I don't know if there's something on your side. No, okay. Well, I don't know if you can throw something in the chat for us, but it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to sit at the table with you all, for lack of better words. I'm always honored to be around resilient Black people, and, no intended for other races. It's just something being able to identify with Black people, especially with the struggles that we face day to day. Gus, I think I hear you now. You something? No. Okay. Well, go ahead, Leisha. If you wanted to say anything, you go right ahead.
Yeah, I actually had just put it in the chat, but I was just saying thank you for providing this platform and this type of educational space for our community. That we got to be the change we want to see.
Yes,
we can talk all day about what other folk don't do for us, but until we begin to step up and do some things for ourselves, we're not going to worry about them. And tonight, since Monday, you've been proving that we're stepping up for our own community. So thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, most definitely. And I have to go ahead, Ms. Mays.
I believe what is the Cash App? Because what I want to do is I want to challenge this person. They don't ask for anything, but it costs so much in order to be able to utilize time, different things. This is not for me. I don't work for them. I don't do anything. I just know that, it takes a lot of time, energy, resources, different things like that. And we've really got to start being more mindful of the sacrifice that we need to start making when we have this level of platform. So I'm gonna ask that, each one of us just, sow a little seed. If we can do just a minimum of $20 a piece, and it's to $ coalition 88. $coalition 88. Y'all show some love, because the people that put this on, man, they be working tirelessly. So challenge and let's get some funds raised for this. That way we can keep it going. All right.
Yeah, most definitely. I appreciate that. I think that what people have to understand, and just the way that this society functions, is that grassroots organizations are people who are closest to the problem. People who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution, but furthest away from the resources. And so, you do what you can to support. I know for me personally, even with all of my connections to all of these fancy national organizations, the National Plus Coalition is absolutely home for me. And so, I'm thankful for Plus and all the work that it had to help support me in all of my efforts. And just being able to jump in and support them in their time of needs and be a part of the movement that they're making has been very impactful in my life since I've been here for a few years. And so, I thank the founder, Ken Assad, for his vision behind the National Plus Coalition and everything that's being done. Unfortunately, we can't really give everybody a hats off, because this is a labor of love until it's not. And this is a million organization, but they absolutely move in stride and with pride of who we are and who we hope to become. So I thank you all for being here with us. And I hope that everyone decides to attend tomorrow for the day of the Black Effect. Blackly Black. I love my people. Y'all have a great night. Peace out.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Take care.